بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Welcome everybody to Beginning Classical Arabic. We've been going for about 10 weeks now, alhamdulillah, give or take, and we've covered a decent amount of material. However, today we're going to slow things down upon request of some of our students, and we're going to have a review lesson because we set a pace and we attempt to do as good as we can with that pace. But every now and again, we slow down and let others catch up, or even intake some new students. We have a couple of new students, inshallah, that will be joining us today or in future classes. We reopened registration. So today is an opportunity to ask questions, to get clarification, and to review the main principles and concepts that we've been dealing with so far. Because of this class is a little bit more review, there's going to be a little bit less interaction on your part than usual. And there's going to be not a lot of review of vocabulary per se, but mostly of the grammar that we've done. As for vocabulary, I will resend out the vocab sheet, which our students have so gracefully, or I should say graciously, prepared for everybody. I'll send that out in the email this week, inshallah, for you to review the vocab that was covered in the book so far. But we began with goals. Any endeavor, it begins with goals. And our goals are not to become fluent in Arabic conversation or even in listening. Those are discrete skills that need to be developed in a different way than with what we're doing here. Our primary goal is to understand upon reading the Quran and the Hadith. So we are focusing on classical Arabic, that is the Arabic of the Quran, the Arabic of the Prophet ﷺ. If you're interested in colloquial Arabic, then the best way to learn colloquial Arabic, if you're not able to do immersion, is by starting with classical Arabic, because all colloquial forms of Arabic are rooted in classical Arabic, and it will make it easier for you. We began by talking about languages in general. And the reason why we began talking about languages in general is because we have to realize that all languages are doing the same thing. They just do it in different ways, right? So in English, we said that the primary thing that communicates meaning is word order, right? We have a sentence here, Tom hits the ball. How do we know who's hitting the ball? Because of what came first. We know that Tom is hitting the ball. We know that the ball is being hit. And all of this we know in the English language due to the order in which the words appear, known as syntax. If I change the syntax of the sentence in English, it changes the meaning of the sentence. I say the ball hit Tom, then all of a sudden the ball is the one who is doing the verb, performing the verb, and Tom is the one who is receiving the verb. However, not every language operates this way. This is the way that analytical languages work, or what are known as analytical languages. Synthetic languages are a little bit different. Synthetic languages, such as Arabic, they operate by not as much dependent on word order, but by putting actual phonemes, units of sound, on the words to tell you what they're doing. Who's doing the verb, who's receiving the verb, who's the subject, who's the predicate, so on and so forth. So we gave an example. Let's take our English sentence, Tom hit the ball. And we said, let's change this language into a synthetic language. Let's make it into something called Engelbic. And we're going to attach a U sound to the end of any word that is doing an action, and an A sound to any word that is receiving the action. All of a sudden, our previous example, Tom hit the ball, becomes Tamu hit the ball. And we could, because we add things onto the words, we are now free to change the order of those words in the sentence. Even if we say the ball Tamu hit, the markers on the ends of the words indicate who is hitting and who is getting hit. This is the freedom provided by an analytic, or excuse me, a synthetic language such as Arabic. Okay, so that was just to open your minds to what's going on in Arabic. In terms of how Arabic sentences are made, there are two primary types of sentences in Arabic. This is also different from English, where we have one main sentence structure: subject, verb, object. Tom hit the ball. In Arabic, we have two main sentence structures. One of them is called a jumla ismiya. Jumla is the word for sentence. Ismiya comes from ism, which means noun, literally a nounal or nominal sentence. And we have a jumla fi'liya. A fi'l is a verb, and so this is a verbal sentence. All of your understanding of Arabic is going to depend upon your understanding and recognizing when you're dealing with a verbal sentence and when you're dealing with a nominal sentence. Why? Because each of those two different types of sentences has different parts. And those different parts have different markers on them that indicate what's going on in the sentence. So just like you enter into the kitchen, you expect to find a stove, you expect to find a refrigerator, you expect to find maybe a table or some knives or utensils. And when you go into the bedroom, you expect to find a bed, you expect to find a dresser and a closet. We need to know what room we're going into. We can't expect to find a bed in the kitchen, nor can we expect to find a fridge in the bedroom, right? This is the most important thing to keeping everything organized in your head. First step is, what type of sentence are we looking at? Are we looking at a nominal sentence or a verbal sentence? Great, that sounds great, Imam. How can you tell the difference between a nominal sentence and a verbal sentence? That is simply due to what is the first word. Does the sentence begin with a noun, or does it begin with a verb? The first part of our class, we focused in on one of those two types of sentences. We focused in on the jumla ismiya, the sentence that begins, the nominal sentence, the sentence that begins with a noun. The jumla ismiya, the nominal sentence, has two main parts. We're going to say that, for example, to run with our analogy, that it is the bedroom, then no bedroom is complete without a bed and a dresser or some sort of drawers, okay? So our nominal sentence, our jumla ismiya, is not complete without two things: the mubtada and the khabar. The mubtada is the subject of the sentence. What is the subject of the sentence? It is who or what we are talking about. And the khabar is the predicate of the sentence, meaning what's the information that we want to communicate about our subject. Allahu ahadun. If we want to make an example, Allahu ahadun. Allah is our subject, the mubtada. He is the one whom we are talking about. What do we want to communicate about Allah? What information do we wish to impart? We want to tell you that He is unique. Ahadun, mubtada and khabar, subject and predicate. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So if we're looking at, for example, what's the difference between the subject and the predicate? What's the difference between the mubtada and the khabar? How can we tell, if we look at an Arabic sentence, what is going to be the mubtada and what is going to be the khabar? We said a little bit ago that Arabic is not nearly as dependent on the order of words or the sequence of words as English is. So we are not just going to look at what comes first in the sentence to determine what is a mubtada and what is the khabar. We're going to look at other things that exist on the word. So we said, for example, if we're to compare, or we are to compare the two parts of a jumla ismiya, the mubtada and the khabar, we find that they have some similarities and they have some differences. What are the essential characteristics of the subject and the predicate, the mubtada and the khabar? The first one is its grammatical case. Okay, more on that in a second. Both the mubtada and the khabar have to be in the same grammatical case, and that is the nominative case. Okay, hold on. Wait a minute. What on earth is grammatical case? Grammatical case is a concept that every language has. How do you know who is doing a verb or who is receiving a verb? Or if something is being possessed, or if something has a relationship where it's owning something else. In grammar, we use the term that's called case to describe these types of relationships. Okay? Certain languages have 10 cases, 15 cases, 20 cases, and each of those cases has a different marker on the word to tell you what case it is. English no longer uses cases for the most part, although historically there was a time when it did. If you go back to older English, we hear barest, right, and hath, and these sorts of things. These are actually case endings, okay, and they have rules for how to apply them, but we don't use them anymore. The only place in modern English where cases creep up are with pronouns. We say, he left, I talked to him. He and him are different. He indicates a subject, whereas him indicates an object. Well, this is what we have going on in Arabic. The words themselves change in order to reflect whether they are the subject, whether they are the object, whether they are possessed or possessing, and so on and so forth. How do they change? Where do they change? Does the entire word change? Does just a part of the word change? And how much does it change? This is one of the most significant things to understand Arabic. The first question we have is, what actually changes on the word? And the answer to that question is simply the last harakah. If we have, I'm going to move over here to my whiteboard. If we have the name, lafz al-jalala, Allah, okay? It will have different cases depending on what it's doing in a sentence. Sometimes you're going to find the word Allah with a dhamma. Sometimes you're going to find the word Allah with a fatha. Sometimes you're going to find the word Allah with a kasra. All of them on the end, on the final letter of the word. This is what changes when we're talking about showing grammatical case. The endings that exist on the ends of the words. The first letter is not changing. The middle of the word's not changing. All the other harakats are not changing. Only the one that exists on the last letter. And that goes for every other word. We're talking about only changes on the end of the word are going to indicate a change in grammatical case, or they're going to indicate grammatical case. Not changes anywhere else. Okay, great, good. So we answered the first question, what can change, or where is the change going to happen? The next question is, what are our options? What changes are there, and what do they mean? In Arabic, there are 4 options, and only 3 of them are available at a time. We'll talk more about that later. They are represented by the harakat that you know and love. We have 4 harakat, 4 options in Arabic. We have the dhamma, we have the fatha, we have the kasra, and we have the sukun. Each of these signs on the end of a word, they mean something. They mean something grammatically. They have a name for the case that they represent, and that case is used for certain types of things. So for example, we have the dhamma. The dhamma represents the nominative case. This is your default case. What do we use the nominative case for? We use it for the subject of a sentence. We use it for the predicate of a sentence. We also use it for the doer of a verb. All of these things, when you see dhamma, you have an indication that one of these 3 things is going on. And there are other things that differentiate which one of those is actually happening. If you see a fatha, then you are in the accusative case. This indicates that something is the object of a verb or the receiver of a verb. If you see a kasra, this indicates that it is in the genitive case. This has to do with either it comes after a preposition, meaning we're talking about a relationship of time and place, or it's part of a possessive construction. It indicates that it possesses something else. So we said that these, if we're looking, we're backing up now to our Jumla Ismiya. Allahu ahadun. Allahu with a dhamma. Ahadun with a dhamma. 2 dhammas, we'll talk about that in a second. The mubtada and the khabar, the 2 main parts of a nominal sentence, a sentence that begins with a noun, is that both of them are in the nominative case called marfu' in Arabic, and both of them have a dhamma to prove it. Okay. Here's another. So if we're zeroing in on this particular case, it's called marfu' in Arabic. It's called the nominative case in English. It's represented by a dhamma. Allahu ahadun. And we use it for the subject, Allahu, the predicate, ahadun, or the doer in a verbal sentence, which we haven't gotten to yet. Good. So then we would ask, okay, good. So we have our nominal sentence. We know that we have a subject and a predicate. Allahu ahadun. Or for a more common example, we can use, what were we saying before? Al-baytu. Al-baytu, for example, ba'idun. The house is far. I'll go to the whiteboard. Pardon my sloppy handwriting. Al-baytu ba'idun. How can we tell? Okay, al-bayt. The sentence begins with a noun. So I know that this is a jumla ismiyah. This is a sentence, a nominal sentence. How can I tell? Anybody? We'll start to get some participation here, inshallah. How can I tell? What is the subject and what's the predicate? What is the mubtada and what is the khabar? By the ending sound. So explain to me, Zaid, what's the difference? Or Seima also has her hand raised. Go ahead, Seima. Anyone can unmute themselves or they can use the chat box, whatever you like. How can I tell which one is the subject, which one is the predicate, which one is the mubtada, which one is the khabar? Go ahead, Mr. Seima.
Al-baytu is a subject, and al-baytu is a mubtada, and ba'idun is a khabar.
This is the right answer, but I want to know why.
Because al-baytu is a noun, and this is a nominative sentence, that's why it's a noun. And a nominal sentence start with the noun, so al-baytu is a noun, that's why it is a mubtada. And always mubtada is a noun. Mubtada is I think proper.
Okay.
Proper.
That's very good. I like your answer. You're thinking along the right lines. However, there's a problem. Ba'id is also a noun. Al-bayt is a noun and ba'id is a noun. They are both ism. So we have two isms. How do we tell which one is the mubtada and the khabar? The Sayyid said dhamma. Okay, here's one dhamma. Here's two dhammas. Both have dhamma. The Hada family said alif lam. Okay, alif lam is half right. Alif lam is the sign. And the reason is, and this is what a couple people messaged me privately, yes, is because it is ma'rifa. Okay, what on earth is ma'rifa? Ma'rifa nakira. Good, good, good. So let's stop. So first question was, we had to learn what room we're in. Are we in the kitchen or the bedroom? Are we in nominal sentence, verbal sentence? And that was what Sister Seima was telling us. We know al-bayt is a noun, so we're in nominal sentence, jumla ismiya. Fantastic, good. Now we realize that jumla ismiya has two parts. It has a mubtada and it has a khabar. We translate this as it has a subject and it has a predicate. We talked about the thing that they share in common. They have to have dhamma. Dhamma. That's in common. But what differentiates them? What separates them? What tells us which one is the subject and which one is the khabar? As a couple people messaged me, it has to do with what is definite and what is indefinite. In Arabic, we call this ma'rifa. Ma'rifa means something is definite. It means that we know exactly what we're talking about. That indicates the subject because we're going to be talking about the subject. And then we have nakira. And nakira means that it is indefinite because the information that we're giving about the subject could be information that could be valid for a number of subjects, right? Al-baytu, the house, ba'idun, is far. Far, we could use far to describe many things, couldn't we? We could use far to describe the masjid, to describe China, to describe my grandmother's house, right? However, al-bayt is specific, indicated by the alif lam, as the Sheikh family says, which means the house. So this difference between what's definite and what is indefinite, what is specific and what is not specific, this is how we tell the difference between the mubtada and the khabar, the subject and the predicate. What is the sign that something is ma'rifah? And what is the sign that something is nakira? It doesn't have to do with the identity of what is on the end of your word. It doesn't have to do with dhamma, fatha, kasra. What it does have to do with is tanween. Tanween meaning there's two of them, two dhammas. For nakira, the sign of something being nakira is that there are two of them. A tanween, whether it is two fathas or two dhammas or two kasras. That is what it means to be nakira, to be indefinite. Whereas to be definite, it means that in a common noun, you are going to have only one harakah. And you are going to have, in this case, alif lam, which means the. That is how we tell. So if you have a sentence, ba'idun al-bayt, this is still a jumla ismiyah. It is. It still has a mubtada and a khabar. It is the same. It's just different in emphasis. You're emphasizing the fact that it is far, as opposed to emphasizing with what you're talking about. The parts are the same. This is mubtada, this is khabar. Why can we tell, or how can we tell? Because al-bayt is ma'rifah, it is definite, and ba'idun is nakira. Just like when Allah says in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allahu Samad. The actual breakdown of the sentence is as-Samad, Allah. As-Samad, hu Allah. But that's a little bit of an exception because we're dealing with proper names. So maybe best not to go into that example right now. Good. So if we go back to our slides, we have two essential qualities of the mubtada and the khabar. Okay? One of them is the same. We said that both the mubtada and the khabar are marfu'. They are both in the nominative case with a dhamma. Both of them. Mubtada, khabar. But they also have a second characteristic that is different, which is what you can tell them apart by, and that is whether they are definite or indefinite, whether they are ma'rifah or nakira. And this corresponds to the and a in English. A house, the house. We have a nice little breakdown here of what happens. The tanween and the alif lam are mutually exclusive. If one exists, the other does not. A word cannot possibly, under any circumstances, have both alif lam and the tanween. So if it has alif lam, the tanween drops away to a single harakah, in this case, al-baytu. And if the alif lam drops away, then under normal circumstances, if it's not possessed, it becomes baytun. Good. Here's a nice little diagram of that as well. So we're in jumla ismiya, we have mubtada and khabar. Each of them has two primary characteristics. One of those characteristics is the same. Both the mubtada and khabar are marfu', which means that they are in the nominative case, represented by the dhamma. And then they have a second characteristic which is different, whether they are definite or indefinite. The mubtada is definite and the khabar is indefinite. Al-baytu kabirun was our previous example. That's right. If you're wondering, also, it helps because sometimes we're learning a language new, we're translating in our heads. And so if you're wondering, this type of sentence in English, we would say the house is large. You're wondering to yourself, where is the is communicated? It is precisely communicated where the sentence changes from ma'rifa to nakira. There is an implied is at that location. Okay, let's see. We talked about sun and moon letters. I don't think that that requires a ton of review right now. I think I'm going to stick to reviewing the grammar and not the pronunciation points. Though we do have some awesome slides for that. I will send out to the new group of students these slides as well, inshallah. Talked about the idgham that happens with that. I guess we'll just give an example. We have al-baytu qaribun. Al-bayt, we pronounce the lam because the ba is sufficiently far away or different from the lam. Whereas an-najmu, the star, we merge the lam into the noon because the noon is not sufficiently different or far away from the lam. An-najmu ba'idun. Good. So we're still within the larger, we're still within our first room, the bedroom. Okay. We have the bed and we have the the dresser. We haven't talked about the closet yet. Okay. So we talked about our bedroom was the jumla ismiya, the first main sentence structure in Arabic. And we talked about the two things that have to be there for a jumla ismiya, and that is the mubtada and a khabar, a subject and a predicate. And we talked about how we can tell the difference between the subject and the predicate. What are their essential qualities and characteristics? There are two of them, one of which is the same, that they are both in the nominative case, marfu' with a dhamma, and the second, which is where they differ. One of them is definite, the other one is indefinite. But some bedrooms, the nice ones, have more than just a bed and a dresser. Some of them have closets. Maybe there's a ceiling fan. Maybe there's a mirror on the wall, right? So we're going to now talk about something that can be added into a jumla ismiya. That makes it more beautiful, that makes it more complicated and more interesting, and has slightly different rules. We're going to now explore the genitive case, which is called in Arabic majroor. Majroor. The genitive case helps us talk about the relationship between two nouns. That relationship can be a relationship of location. Something is under something else. Or it can be a relationship of time. Something is after something else. Or it can be a relationship of possession. This thing belongs to me. This is the teacher's desk, the student's pen, and so on and so forth. So in every language, we use the genitive case to talk about these sorts of things. In Arabic, it's called majroor, and it is represented by a kasra. So here is our old breakdown of the sentence. Okay. Yes. Genitive case is used for relationships between nouns. And the sign of the genitive case in Arabic is the kasra. Talked about how every single one is. Every harakah is specific to a certain case, which is really, really handy in Arabic. the kasra doesn't represent more than one case, right? And in order to help us talk about relationships of place between nouns, we learned a couple prepositions. Ala, which is on or on top of, and fi, in or inside. And we noticed how the grammar changes in a prepositional phrase, right? What is the word that has to have the kasra to demonstrate the genitive case? It is the second word in the prepositional phrase, the noun that comes after the preposition. So we have our example sentence here. Al-talibu fil bayti. The student is in the house. Okay? This is still a jumla ismiya. Our first word is an ism. Our first word is also mubtada. But the khabar has changed. Instead of the predicate just being a single word, now it is a prepositional phrase. And because it is a prepositional phrase, then the grammar is going to change a little bit as well. We have fi and then al-bayt, and because al-bayt is after a preposition, it now has to have a kasra. Fil bayti. That kasra here tells us that this is part of the prepositional phrase. We had another example, al-kitabu ala sariri. That's the book is on top of the bed. Anything following a prepositional phrase is majroor. It is in the genitive case, and that is shown by a kasra. Good. Okay, very good. We spent a while talking about practicing prepositional phrases. We talked a little bit about mamnu' min as-sarf. I'm not going to go into that now. We use prepositional phrases to transition into talking about the second main type of sentence in Arabic, okay? So if we like our room analogy, and I kind of think the room analogy is helpful. You can probably come up with better analogies. But if we said that our nominal sentence, our jumla ismiya, was like the bedroom, and the jumla fi'liya was like the kitchen, and each of them have different parts to them or different things that make them special and different. Isn't it true that you might also find things that are in both? If there's a mirror in the bedroom, isn't it true that you might find a mirror somewhere in the kitchen? It's possible. And so that's, the prepositions are like our mirror or ceiling fan, if you like. Hopefully there's a ceiling fan in the bedroom and in the kitchen. Prepositional phrases aren't limited to jumla ismiya. They're not limited to nominal sentences. They can be anywhere. They can be anywhere. And so it's a good segue into looking at prepositional phrases in our second type of sentence and familiarizing ourselves with that other type of sentence. Here's a breakdown of both types of sentences. So we had talked about the jumla ismiya, and it had two primary components, the mubtada and the khabar, the subject and the predicate. Jumla fi'liya is in a completely different room. It's the kitchen. You don't expect to find a bed in the kitchen. You don't expect to find a dresser with your clothes hanging up in the kitchen. We expect different things from the kitchen. We expect to find a fridge. We expect to find some plates and some bowls. We expect to find a stove. So the parts that make up a verbal sentence, a jumla fi'liya, are entirely different than the parts that make up a nominal sentence. What are those parts? A jumla fi'liya begins with a verb. Begins with a verb, and this is the most common sentence structure in Arabic. The default sentence structure in Arabic is jumla fi'liya. If you look through just the last 3 pages of the Quran, the vast majority of those sentences are verbal sentences. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Right? إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ. تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبْ وَتَبَّ. These are all verbal sentences. So what are the essential components of a verbal sentence? We have, it begins with a verb. Next is the subject of the verb, meaning the doer, the one who performs the verb. And then often, but not always, we have an object of the verb. If we're looking at an example, we have خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْأَرْضَ. Notice that this takes some getting used to because Arabic has a sequence of verb, subject, object, whereas in English it's subject, verb, object. So we have beginning Arabic speakers, they like to say things like أنا أذهب إلى الدكان, or أنا أذهب, or أنا أدخل إلى المسجد, or في المسجد. So they're translating literally from English, I am going to the masjid. And anybody who is a native Arabic speaker can tell right away that this is not a native Arabic speaker, because in Arabic we would begin with the verb. ذهبت إلى المسجد. أذهب أنا إلى المسجد. So here we have خلق, he created, Allahu, doer of the verb, al-arda, object of the verb. Notice something here. Just like in the first type of sentence, jumla ismiya, the mubtada and the khabar had different rules for grammar. What case were they in? Well, we have different rules going on here in this type of sentence. The doer of the verb, just like the mubtada and khabar, the subject and predicate from our jumla ismiya, is going to be marfu', is going to be in the nominative case shown by al-dhamma, Allahu. And the object of our verb, al-arda, is going to be mansub in the accusative case, which is shown by a fatha. Okay? This is how a verbal sentence works. Okay, what case is the verb in, you might ask? Ah, I'm glad you said that. In Arabic, verbs by default do not have grammatical case. In Arabic, we have 3 tenses of verbs. We have past, present, and imperative. Just like in English, there is no separate verb form for the future. We make compound tenses. We use particles and things like that. And within Arabic, only one of these 3 types of sentence can have grammar, or can have a grammatical case, and that is the present tense. For imperative verbs and past tense verbs, there is no grammatical case. Okay? So we have the present tense verbs over here. It is declinable, meaning it will have a grammatical case, whereas the past and imperative, they do not. That's why here we have khalaqa, past tense verb. He created, literally. It has no case. It's not marfu', mansub, majroor, majzoom, it's nothing. We started to talk about, and so there's basically 2 more topics, and we'll wrap it up there. There's 2 more topics. First of them is a short one, and then there's the reviewing the possessive. The first topic is, okay, remember way back in the beginning of this class, we talked about the endings on words and how they change for grammar. And we talked about not any place on the word changes. Only the very end changes. Well, when we look at past tense verbs, we have a similar thing going on. When we conjugate them, not everything can change in a verb. The ending, the third letter is fixed, the first letter is fixed, and the second letter is what can change. We talk about khalaqa, dakhala, kharaja, dhahaba, all these sorts of things. We haven't gotten into conjugation yet. That's coming up, inshallah, and that's going to happen in a very slow and gradual manner. One of the good things about this book. This is a nice chart overviewing the different grammatical parts of a verbal sentence. We have the verb, which if it's a past tense verb is mabni, meaning it doesn't have a grammatical case. Then we have the subject, which is not called mubtada here, it's called the fa'il, the doer, and it is marfu', it is in the nominative case with a dhamma. And then we have the object, which is called maf'ul, and it is mansub with a fatha. Excellent job. Okay. Last major thing to review, which is what we had done most recently. This is the genitive case. We said that genitive case we used to talk about relationships between nouns. The last relationship we have yet to talk about is possession. Okay. We said that in English, possession is communicated in two ways. First, using an apostrophe. This is the most common. Abdullah's book, yesterday's newspaper. And then the second way is to use the word of, the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a friend of mine. And so in Arabic, literally, we're going to use the second pattern, almost 100% translated from English, using of. We are never going to use anything that resembles the apostrophe construction. This is important because it affects the order of the words, right? If you say Allah's prophet or the prophet of Allah, you're changing the order, aren't you? The one that is possessed and the one that is possessing are in the different order. So in Arabic, we say Kitabullahi, the book of Allah. What we would conversationally translate as Allah's book, but to keep things straight in our mind, we will say the book of Allah, Kitabullahi. The thing being possessed comes first, the one possessing it comes after. This whole concept of possession is called idafa in Arabic. The first part, the thing being possessed, is called mudaf, and the second part, the possessor, is called mudaf ilayh. How can we recognize a possessive construction within a sentence, whether it's in a nominal sentence or a verbal sentence? There are, just like with mubtada and khabar, there are certain essential characteristics to the mudaf and the mudaf ilayh. There are other characteristics that can change, that are not essential. So if we look at the first thing, if we look at the first thing, the mudaf, the thing being possessed, kitab, there is something that is essential about the mudaf that never changes. And that is the fact that it has no alif lam and it has no tanween. Okay? This is different from what we said before. Normally, a noun by itself, it either has to have alif lam or tanween. And we said with certainty that a noun can never have both. Never ever have both alif lam and tanween. But there is one situation where a noun can have neither alif lam or tanween, and that is when it is possessed. When it is part of a possessive construction, it loses its alif lam and it loses its tanween. Whether it's a dhamma or not, that is something that is not fixed. It can be a dhamma, it can be a fatha, it can be a kasra. We use the example from the Quran, وَيَدْخُلُونَ فِي Dinillahi afwaja. Dinillahi, the religion of Allah. A possessive construction, but deen has a kasra because it comes after a preposition fi. So whether this is kasra or dhamma or fatha, that can change, but the thing that cannot change is that there's only one. It has no tanween and it has no alif lam. As for the second word, the mudaf ilay, the possessor, the thing that is fixed and certain about this word is that it is in the genitive case. It is majroor, and that is demonstrated in this case by a kasra. Kitabullahi. It will never be kitabullahu. It will never be kitabullaha. It will always, always, always have a kasra. And we learned a couple other little things at the end of last class, but honestly, I think that it doesn't really bear repeating because it's not one of the primary points of what we've been going over. So does anybody have any questions at all about anything that was covered today? This is your chance. Anything that's not clear, anything that is ambiguous, anything that you can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box, whatever you like.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
You said it has to follow kasra, but when we make adhan, we say Muhammadur Rasulullah. We don't say.
Okay. The sound isn't very good coming from you, but I think I understand what you're asking. I think what you're saying is that Muhammadun Rasulullahi. Why am I saying ya Imam? That this has to have a kasra. When either, let me erase this. Muhammadun Rasulullah. You heard what was said, Rasulullah. The last harakah wasn't pronounced. In colloquial Arabic speech and even in the recitation of the Quran, we do not pronounce the final harakah. We do not pronounce the final harakah. If we were, then we would certainly have a kasra on the end of Allah. Rasulullahi. Yes. The second thing, and I wasn't sure whether you're asking about the kasra on the end of Allah or the kasra on the end of Rasul. That explains
Allah.
Allahi.
Yes.
Rasulullahi.
Yes.
It's simply an aspect of pronunciation. People cut off. If you go to the Quran, find anywhere in the Quran it says Rasulullah, you're going to find a kasra on the end of Allah. What determines whether you say it or not depends on where you are stopping. If I say Muhammadun Rasulullah, I'm not stopping because there's not a kasra. There's a kasra there. I'm just not saying it because the habit and the custom in Arabic is to not pronounce the final harakah. But believe you me, there is a kasra there. Always. Abadan da'iman. Rasulullahi. Baytullahi. Whether we say it or not. And when we're practicing Arabic, when we're in this class or in other Arabic classes, we pronounce every single harakah in order to understand. Because someone that's from an Arabic speaking background, yes, they'll say Rasulullah. Ask them, what's the harakah on the end of Allah? Wallahi, you'll find that many of them don't know. Whether it's a dhamma, whether it's a fatha, whether it's a kasra, whether there's anything there. Many of them who have never studied Arabic grammar don't know that there is a harakah on the end of that word, and that harakah is kasra always, because they don't pronounce it, because that's the custom.
So when you say Muhammadur Rasulullah, it actually has kasra. But if somebody says Muhammadur Rasulullah, then the meaning changed, right?
Are you talking about Rasul or Allah?
Yes.
Okay, good.
No, now in the Rasul at the top of lam, if you put dam kasr fatah instead of dhamma, the meaning will be changed, right?
Yes. Good. So this has to do with the grammar of the rest of the sentence. What type of sentence is this? Jumla ismiya or jumla fi'liya?
Muhammad is ismiya.
This is ismiya. Good. Where's the mubtada?
Muhammad.
Yes. So then what's left over is the khabar. Huh? What's the default case of the khabar? The default case is it's marfu'. Huh? Which is why Rasul has
Yeah. Yeah. No. I understand what I was just making sure that when you hear somebody saying Rasulullah, so it's actually changing the meaning of the jumla ismiya.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Now, there are some situations where Rasulullah is correct if that's the object of the sentence. What if we were to say uhibbu? What if we were to say uhibbu? I love. Rasulullahi. Yes, correct. I love the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Rasul now is part of a verbal sentence. Uhibbu is the fi'l. The fa'il is in there somewhere. And this is now maf'ul. This is the object. The object of my love is the Prophet of Allah. Which is why then it would have a fatha. Uhibbu Rasulallahi. Ra'aytu Rasulallahi. You hear in the hadith. Sami'tu Rasulallahi. You also hear in the hadith, I heard the Messenger of Allah say, because the Messenger of Allah is the object of the sentence. Just like in our sample sentence, Khalaqallahu al-arda. This is Uhibbu Rasulallahi. Very good. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. That's completely correct. Anybody else? Doubts, questions, concerns? We've gone way over time. Normally our class is 40, 45 minutes, but we've completed an hour. So forgive me for that. And then we'll pick up Wednesday, inshallah, with a new lesson. I will send out to all the students again, because now we have some new students. I will send out the slides and the vocab, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.